Um, Frank is one of the founding members of UU Bridge. He and his wife Bonnie live in Madison County. So Frank, I will turn it over to you.
It was about a month ago. I zoomed in on a meeting of UU Bridge in which the naturalness of water was discussed. I don't recall hearing the fact announced or expressed that real water always flows in obedience to the laws of nature. Even when it's no more than a raindrop on a window, or no less than the tides of the ocean. Movements of water can be perfectly predicted and understood by the laws of physics. But today, I will speak of a meaning that was implied by that service. The invisibility of ideas that flow through the minds of humans. So long as our ideas represent the movements of real objects, their message makes sense. But when our ideas involve things that do not cast shadows, the flow of our thoughts becomes mysterious. There once was a time when nearly everyone believed that the laws governing physical things could temporarily be superseded by a supernatural being that people believed in. Such fantasies as God's parting the water of the Red Sea to permit the escape of an enslaved people. Many modern folks believe that that story and many similar stories never happened. But many other people still put faith in them. More in accord with reality, here are the last two verses of a famous little poem written by Richard Lovelace more than 300 years ago to explain to his sweetheart why he was going off to war. True, a new mistress, now I chase the first foe in the field, and with a stronger faith embrace a sword, a horse, a shield. Yet this inconstancy is such as thou too shalt adore. I could not love thee, dear, so much, loved I not honor more. Today we have various physical theories that explain why Lovelace adored his beloved. But no physical law explains why the poet loved the honor that led him to risk his life. Some say he was just showing off to impress a young lady. Or it could be said that Lovelace was simply trying to write a poem that conveyed a popular belief. That is, that poetic words in and of themselves can create beautiful experiences. I guess that by studying the wars going on in 1649 we could find an explanation for why he wrote the poem. But we cannot penetrate Lovelace's mind to determine the thought underlying those words. We know he was a sometime soldier and that he was twice imprisoned for making rebellious statements. But by no brief exploration of his biography can we say for certain that he loved a lady named Lucasta. I suppose it's safe to say that whether or not she existed, he purported to love a lady called by that name and another named Althea. Even if those two ladies never lived, they have now been immortalized. It was the poem he wrote for Althea that more clearly expressed a belief in the idea that stones do not a prison make, nor iron walls bars a cage. With those words, Lovelace said more directly that physical objects merely obstruct physical movement, but to the free mind, they do not exist. Here are the final 4 lines of To Althea. If I have freedom in my love, and in my soul am free, angels alone that soar above enjoy such liberty. Written 7 years before to Lucasta, while the poet was in prison, the poem he wrote for Althea clearly points out that Lovelace knew the difference between the logic of physical things external to the mind and things merely imagined. In more modern language, he knew the physical truth. He knew the physical truth operates by the cause and effect laws of nature. But when those movements stand for invisible objects, invisible ideas, they obey no rigid order. A few weeks ago, I watched the famous movie To Kill a Mockingbird. While watching, the thought flashed that I had heard the words of its title more than 15 years before the novel was published. My mother spoke them, and strangely, she used those words in the context of an event very similar to the storyline of the novel. My mother told the story of an innocent Black man who was lynched by a mob that left his body to rot by a small stream. My mother went on to say that for years afterwards, a bright light streamed upward from where the innocent man's body had fallen, announcing to the world that a sin had been committed. A year or so before my mother told me that story, I guess I was about 5 years old, I went with her to a huge family gathering in a county just north of my home in Mobile, Alabama. The occasion was to honor the father or grandfather of the girl who later wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. I was supposedly a relative of Harper Lee's, a famous a rumor that's probably not true. One of my mother's closest friends in Mobile was a lady known as Cousin Ann, whose last name was Lee. I suppose we went to the great party in Monroe County at the invitation of Cousin Ann. I also suppose that Harper Lee, at the time only 11 years old, was also there, and that she saw me. The character Dill in the movie version, the character Dill in the movie version of the book looks very much the way I would have looked at the age of 5. He and I were both small for our age and buck-toothed with big ears. But that may have been only a coincidence. In any case, the plot of the novel, and in fact, a plot line that runs through all of human history, was simply hatred, an emotion that operates in parallel with a complex stream of physical happenings. The emotions are real, but the way they feel cannot be seen by an examination of the body. The parts of the brain, the parts of our brains, do not have to be taught to interact with each other. They behave as they do by admittedly complex physical laws. But the ideas they stand for remain invisible, even in the most careful physical examination. In other words, we humans have personally either invented or subscribed to ideas that existentially do not exist. The honor that sent Lovelace off to war, the liberty he felt while imprisoned behind stone walls, these do not and cannot be explained as physical effects. They are ideas. Why did Cain murder his brother? Or better, or why do we believe that story? Why do red and black ants kill each other? Why do they go to war? Why can't they simply work together to obtain life's necessities? The answer to those questions cannot be found by an examination of the bodies of man or insect. Men and ants clearly see each other. But why? How does that observation lead them to kill what they see? As an explanation, we have invented the word instinct, a sound which, when seen for exactly what it means, permits us to leave difficult questions unanswered. We may invent theories to explain instincts, but at the bottom line, we are compelled to confess that we simply do not know their cause. Ants kill other ants because that's the way they are. But then, how exactly are they? In the movie Spartacus, two huge armies stood apart on the hillsides of a beautiful little valley. If the armies had been nothing other than different colorations of the hillsides, there's a chance no motion picture would have portrayed the scene. But after a while, the armies moved forward and started killing and maiming each other for reasons that to this day remain invisible. This does not mean the motives were unreal. It simply means the armies possessed different invisible ideas. Some say the slave army fought for freedom, and that the Roman army simply obeyed orders. But in a transcendental sense of the word freedom, both armies were free to do as they pleased. If a Roman soldier or a slave lifted a sword, shot an arrow, or threw a spear, they were obviously free to do so. If that's true, then throughout human history, the word freedom has been misunderstood. The word actually means we are free to behave in any way that makes sense to us. That being the case, our problem today is the same as the problem facing the two armies arrayed on the hillsides of that beautiful little valley. We who are about to die must at last see the difference between being pushed by the physical laws of nature and being free to choose which way to move. The difference between the laws of nature that pushes and the freedom to choose which way to move. In the United States, we have organized ourselves around that idea. The founders of our nation understood the difficulty involved in everyone agreeing on significant issues. So they drafted a contract called the Constitution that delegated the making of hard choices to people more intelligent than the run-of-the-mill citizen. Their ideas formed the equivalent of two armies perched on a hillside. But instead of having the armies set about slaughtering each other, they envisioned the armies thinking things over. Their disagreements would be settled by discussions of the issues and deciding on the basis of reasoned arguments. Nice idea. Unfortunately, the leaders who thought up that wonderful idea knew of no way to vote human emotion out of office. It's as if the leaders of our political parties are riding back and forth in front of their troops, encouraging them, much in the way cheerleaders incite devotion among people at a football game. Crowds are not asked which side is right, but are urged to pull for their side, with the occasional difference that the cheerleaders announce the invisible ideas associated with their team. Here on our little hillside, liberal cheerleaders stimulate the members of unions and Unitarian churches, while their conservative counterparts make similar pleas to stockbrokers. Every now and then, we see one of the liberal contenders basing their appeal on invisible ideas implied by the Constitution, whereas the conservatives make a case that sticking to the ironclad push-pull language of that document, obviously those aligning with the historically recognized wording have an easier path, an easier job than liberals who must appeal to the emotion, invisible emotion that stands behind the love of liberty. And now it ought to be clear why the liberal task, why our task is more difficult. We're compelled to use a word the poets seem to know could not be defined. Freedom can only be dreamed. Recent philosophers have feasted on the difference between being free from and being free to. Ideally, we are free to do as we please, so long as we and all others are prevented from doing what the law prohibits. Looking around, we see clearly that passing laws does not and cannot change people's minds. Laws control actions, not thoughts. So here we are, absolutely free to find a way to live together in peace. And those who have found it are absolutely compelled. We are compelled to teach the beauty of such a way of life to everyone. That goal cannot be reached by logical wording, but only by a direct appeal to the emotions. We may, with Lovelace and other poets and poetic philosophers, be able to reason ourselves into such a way of life, but our reason is no more free. Our reason is no more free than other people's freedom to reason as they do. We will not change their thinking by using the word freedom, as is obvious. Even those with whom we clearly disagree are as free as we are to believe as they please. And that's the tragic meaning of the word freedom. If it were not for the power invoked by the sound of the word, the idea might seem totally wretched. But the same word, the same thought, the same invisible idea fits into the lock, restraining even the most seal-tight mind, opening it to an eternal idea if we are free to think ugliness, we are just as free to think beauty. A very nice thought. Thank you for